Good afternoon, Ilanit. How are you?
Hi, Dylan. How are you doing?
Yeah, cool. Very good, thank you. Well, thanks very much for making some time to talk through these very important issues.
Happy to be here.
Cool. So yeah, we have a bunch of things that I think we said we would talk about, but I thought the best point of departure would be to just define trade secrets. I had one user in Discovery saying it sounds like something like James Bond, and he thought it sounded like really cool, but it's not as mysterious as it sounds, really, is it?
Yeah, I think the name trade secrets is a bit problematic because it doesn't really convey what it is, and people are confused with the words trade secrets. But basically, it's any information that gives the company an advantage that can't be known or copied by others. So you can think of anything that gives a company a competitive advantage it can be considered a trade secret, but something that really helps my clients understand it is when I say, and the fact that you keep it as a trade secret is what actually provides you with a competitive advantage, which is, because you could say a lot of things can give me a competitive advantage, but there are certain things that I know, that I intuitively know, and after you go through a trade secret exercise, you suddenly see it more clearly. The things that give you that edge. It sometimes happens that your colleagues ask you, what is this thing that you do and how do you do it? I had a client tell me, I realize that people call me to ask how I get into the price offer, how I build the price offer. Then I realize I have this process that I go through, and that's probably a trade secret. So it's basically anything that gives you
Yeah.
an edge, and the fact that you're keeping it a secret is the reason why you have that edge.
It's a good way of thinking about it, that it's almost because you're intentional about keeping it that way. That's what makes a kind of difference to anything else that might be. We hear this from founders, and I'll play it out and ask you to kind of push back. So if I'm a tech founder, I say that we've got really good cyber, and by the way, only the really important people know the good stuff. So we're okay. Like, what would be your response to that?
Well, I would say that it's great that you have security, but just limiting access isn't enough. And the real protection comes from making sure that those who do have access understand how to deal with that kind of information. So I would say that it's the wrong approach, because trusting people to know this intuitively can be a huge mistake. So I'll give you an example. Imagine there is a senior guy, developer guy, and there is a guest coming over, and the guest represents a buyer that's interested in making a purchase, or an investor. And the developer is eager to help the company out. Maybe he's a co-founder, and he's starting to share all this sensitive information because he wants to impress the investor and the buyer. And that's a problem, because imagine that that's not really a buyer, and that's someone who's representing the competitor who wants to, who needs the information. So it's tricky. And another thing is the ownership. So think about it. It's all in your people's heads. If you're a small company and only a few people know it, then the information is all in their heads. So can the company really claim that it's the owner? So you need to make it clear for people, what's the trade secret, and they need to understand what's the difference between their general know-how and the company's asset. There are and once you have clarity on that, then everything becomes so much easier to understand. Does this answer your question, Dylan?
It does. It does. And maybe just following from what you just said, comparing to know-how and so on, just while we're setting our terms, how would you differentiate between trade secrets and other types of IP?
Okay, so differentiating between other types. So I would say that trade secrets are not, there's no registration, there's no waiting. You just, unlike patents or trademark, they don't require filing. You can protect them immediately as long as you treat them as secrets. And then they stay secret, right? They're not public like patents and trademarks. If you do it right, then it's just impossible to reverse engineer them or to know what they are. They don't have any expiry date. But with all these advantages, you can lose them overnight, right? So that's the catch. If you don't protect them properly, then if someone else steals it or accidentally exposes it, which happens more often, then you could just lose them.
Yeah, some pretty big advantages, but also vulnerabilities. They're kind of quite delicate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So, you were talking about identifying, and I guess step one is always kind of identifying what you have before you can train people or set up policies or any of those types of things. You know, in a pre-Intanify world, because I know that's the reason that we work together, but how would one actually go about, or call it a year ago, how do you go about actually identifying trade secrets?
I think that you can start by asking, you can start by asking a question that is even, brutal. If someone walked out tomorrow and gave certain information to a competitor, what is this information? What would be the information that if it went out would actually hurt us? And that's kind of a first filter. But then you can break it down to categories. You have the technological side where you have the algorithms and the source code or architecture. You have the machine learning models that trained on the unique data. Then you have the data labeling methods, and there's so many things on the technical side if that's what you're doing. And then you can look at a different department in the company and look at the processes and know-how, like the guy who realized that they prepare price offers in a unique ways, but it could be how you optimize operations. Or so how do you do that? We usually do it pre-Intanify in a kind of a conversation and an interview, but it's like you kind of need to take the people in the company through a shift in the way they look at their business. Because they don't usually think, the fact that I do things the way that I do gives me a competitive advantage. And they just don't see it this way. But once you tell them, if this went out of the company and your competitor could do it, would that hurt your company? Oh, definitely, that would be a disaster. And then, they start thinking of what qualifies as a trade secret. And a good process is the one where the client then knows how to identify it later on their own. Because they kind of know how to think about it.
Yeah. I guess being entrepreneurs, you have to be optimistic and blue sky. So it's not a helpful way to wake up and think about what kind of disaster could unfold. But probably absolutely essential every now and again to go through that exercise and say, so wait, what are the 10 things that could kill my company? If somebody walks out and there, you can put protection measures in afterwards.
Absolutely, but listen, Dylan, I'll give you another example that's not, it's not typical, but companies use social media companies to help them, talk the language, and they collect a lot of information about the market. They know what works, they know what doesn't work. That also qualifies as a trade secret. And there's someone doing stuff for you that they're not in the company, but definitely this information is worth a lot, right? So one, you want to own this information because these insights are very valuable for you. But second, you want to agree with the company doing the social media that you should be the owner of that information. So that awareness of what gives me a competitive advantage is very, very important, because if I come to an investor and tell them, I understand what the challenges, what my potential clients' challenges are, then you being the owner is critical of all these insights that you've come across.
I was going to ask you for an example of trade secrets that are overlooked, but I think that's a really good one, right? Because that is not the kind of thing you would normally think of. Now, that employee has built insight in their head, and I guess you can never take that away, that they understand the market kind of a bit better. But what would be an issue is if they walked out with the analytics and the data that's being collected. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Absolutely. And maybe connected to that, trade secret that are often overlooked is negative know-how that also kind of relates to the social media, but it also happens on the development side, right? So what not to do, what's already failed, and which suppliers to avoid, and which partnerships would never convert, or which algorithms didn't work. Most founders don't think about this as trade secrets, but it absolutely is.
That's a tricky one, though. Things like negative know-how that for like developers, once somebody's learned something that doesn't work, presumably in a lot of cases, that's just their own professional development. Like, where do you draw the line of saying that was a trade secret versus that someone's just learning, how to do the job?
That's a great one. Well, usually, and it happens with our clients when we get the vibe from employees when they start feeling uncomfortable, and then we apply a certain filter that says, okay, what information can I say that a certain employee would never have been able to have known if he didn't work for that company? And if the answer is certain negative know-how, he would never have been. And maybe negative know-how is not the best example for carving out employee know-how and company assets, but that's the filter that we use. What is it that but for the company, but for the employees work in the company, he would never have been exposed to? Then that's definitely a trade secret.
So if they're working on a very particular, I know you do a lot in like agri, one particular seed and one particular climate, and it's resilience, then that person, having worked on that project, knowing what was not resilient, could only ever have come from that job. I think that's pretty clear. Okay, cool. So we've been through the mapping process. We're using Intanify, and we've now got a thorough register of what the trade secrets are, or certainly what the, say, 20 key ones are that would be company killers, should someone walk out the door. What are the, relatively high level, what are the steps to actually protection, or the components of protection?
I think that the first one would really be the, what we call discovery. That's also pre-Intanify, but you kind of want to go on a call and start understanding what assets. When I try to go high level, I start with, we don't start with the little things. We start with the 20% that make up 80% of the assets in terms of importance and in terms of value. So we kind of go on a call. If it's a technical conversation, that it could be, if you thought you could file a patent, that's sometimes a good conversation starter. Then what do you think is novel in your company? So it's a really good, it's a good place to start the call. So we kind of give provide a basic list to start with, and then say, okay, let's see who's exposed to that kind of information. We have unique insights that come out of the data, and we have the algorithms that we use on the trained data, and let's see who's the team working on it. And then we can kind of do a very broad trade secret protection policy. We don't want to overwhelm anyone. So we kind of see, who in the company has the right frame of mind to work on access control, who can use, what does it mean to work in a company that has a trade secret? And we kind of see what's right for the company, because sometimes we work with a COO who is really hands-on and knows, what to do and what procedure to do. And sometimes it's just a five people company, and then we can take the co-founder and kind of guide him or her through the process of what it means. So what it means when a visitor comes to look at the company, or what does it mean to go to a conference and start talking about your value proposition, or your how you present your company. So it really depends on the dynamic of the company and what and what realistic to expect of them. Do you see what I mean?
Okay, cool. So you always start with the list, and then it's from that point kind of on context. But some of the important things in there is disclosing information generally. Also, I guess with team, exit interviews and onboarding are important, I guess, irrespective of any size company, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, I should have mentioned make sure that the agreements contain the right clauses. I mean, not just a very, very general IP clause, but give context to the agreement signed. So make sure that the person coming into the company understands that he's expected not to bring any material from his previous employer, so as not to contaminate the the new company's IP. And then once you train and explain to people what the trade secrets are, and they have signed this employment agreement, then they understand it's not that they sold their soul to the employer. There are just certain things that the employer expects them to keep safe, because the employer sees it, or the manager sees it as very valuable information. So for bigger companies, we would work with HR and tell them how to onboard employees and how to offboard, what to say. And for smaller companies, it can be the CTO.
Look, we have that in our exit interview kind of checklist. And I was guided a lot by something I'd seen from you before of it really, you should make it almost a positive thing. At the end of the day, it is a soft warning, but it needn't be a intimidating, threatening type of thing. It's kind of so since you've been working with us, you've worked on, these 5 really important things to us.
Yeah.
And just to remind you that you have obligations under your contract. Is that kind of how you would advise?
I tell you what, when I started working with trade secrets, I thought that trade secrets can be a tool to empower employees to, realize their, what their contribution is to the company, and how, how their work adds so much value to the company. But time proved that, they're in the day-to-day development work, they don't always care about, the level of contribution. They just want it to be very practical, tell us what we need to do. And sometimes they're relieved from the process because they kind of get the clarity. So I try to do it with stories, to, explain the warning, what they should be careful, but also at the same time, this is what we expect of you. And when they leave, it can be a red stop sign just to say, listen, this is really valuable.
It's funny, I heard the head of IP or the head of trade secrets, I can't remember that title, at TSMC, and they have, I don't know, I want to say 50,000 trade secrets or something like that, and they have it like really institutionalized, where there is I think it's called the Gold Award, the Trade Secret Gold Award, and their engineers use that on visa applications to the US as kind of like a official credentials to say, like, now that's obviously a specific case, but I think it's always probably good for everybody to know that they were working on something that was important enough to the company to kind of, have a place in a register like that. But the other thing I hear from lawyers, carrots and sticks. It's, the carrot's nice, but you really do need to, it doesn't have to be a big stick, but it has to be, or maybe it doesn't have to be a stick that's wielded very strongly, but it's got to be a stick there to say that that's important and you have obligations kind of when you leave. Yeah, at the same lawyer that I'm thinking of would go as far as, if you know that the employee is going to a particular competitor, so your number one competitor, they just send off a letter to the new employer, again, which doesn't necessarily need to be very heavily legal, but like, we are aware that you got this employee, congratulations, hope it goes well, just to let you know that they are under the firing obligations, like this thing.
Yeah,
And then
so I had a
yeah.
client who actually called the new employer and said,
Mm,
listen, I know that two of my employees are going to work for you, and I want you to know that we are very worried about this. And and
mm,
we want to emphasize that we're going to see it in a terrible way if, they're, as you said, they're obligated,
mm.
they have agreements with us, and just know that we're on the lookout, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And that can be awkward. Most companies don't do it, but
Mm,
I've definitely seen this. And
yeah.
the carrot and the stick. I had a lecture to commercial lawyers who said, we work with companies, and it's really difficult for us to talk to our clients about trade secrets because we're not experts. And it's a really nice use case of trade secrets. The example you gave about the visa and
Mm,
thinking about all these things that you could do with a company that has its assets defined. And I
mm,
find that with the carrot and stick, there's two sides to it, and it's a learning curve, I think, for IP professionals that do trade secrets. You have on the white side, on the one side, the warning signs. This is what
mm,
can happen to your company if information leaks. And then on the other side, this is what happens when a company approaches investors and can show in their pitch deck that they have all these assets that have been identified, contribute to their value. So
mm.
there's two sides of it, and every company has,
Yeah,
different dynamics and behavior. And but yeah, think of the most use cases you can to explain the ecosystem of trade secrets. It's very
mm,
useful.
yeah. What they say, there's good people doing bad and then bad people doing bad, and the vast majority is actually the good people doing bad. So a simple reminder of here's what's important, here's your obligations, probably enough, right? And even from the new employee's perspective, I'm sure in most cases, they really just wanted that person because that person's great and whatever. And if there was a chance, or if there was a 5% of the motivation was to get some secret source with just that phone call. Israelis are very direct. I would send a letter. I wouldn't, but I'm not surprised to hear that you have a client that was making the call. But then maybe that you just let go of that 5%. You're like, well, that's actually not worth it for that.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about mapping. I know that that's almost something you well known for. And when you talk about trade secrets and competitive advantage, and it all sounds a little bit vacuous, but it shouldn't be vacuous at all, really. It should be pretty precise. And I was wondering if you could just talk through the way that you do that, or maybe starting off like, why would you do that, or why do your clients do the mapping process?
Okay, so that's a good question. Um, the way I see it, we don't map for the sake of mapping. We kind of do the mapping to be able to connect the intangible assets to the what the company does, and then to present it to whoever you want to present it to, whether it's to the innovation authority, to investors, or to buyers. So you can think about it this way. You could do a certain mapping and say and show, oh, I have all these algorithms, right? But if you say that your experience taught you that you have 20 years of experience in the industry, and you realized what the most common challenges were, and your system actively detects and resolves the top three failure points, and your
Mm,
assets are connected. So this is how your assets are connected to your competitive
mm,
advantage, right? So it helps to show how these assets make you valuable, and it
mm,
also shows that you're able to attract clients who have these challenges. And it's
mm,
all about the context, right? So now it's not just technical IP, it's strategic. So you're tying it to the client wins. It shows that you understand the market. It explains why your company is able to attract the right clients to grow. And that's it. At the end of the day, it's all about the context. And the results of the mapping become valuable when you can show how they solve real problems for your clients and how they give you real advantages. So it starts with a kind of a mapping, but it's really all about the context.
Yeah. And it's interesting because if you're in a VC pitch, you would, or an investor pitch, you probably, if you're any good, you would have to do that, but a little bit on the fly. And it would be like, but why is that important? And it would be kind of maybe the top one, or the one that was most available, and that you would kind of make that decision. But having done it as a process, you would actually have kind of like a holistic view on the top 5 most important underpinnings of your competitive advantage, and of those 5, which one is really the most important, and the exact linkage between the values. It's about making what's almost instinctive to be quite explicit. Would that be fair to say? Okay.
Yeah, I think I would look at the intersection between the technology, the market, and the team, and concentrate on that. Where the IP sits right in the middle, and the intangible assets. I think that would resonate the most.
So how, like, at a high level, how do you actually go about doing that process? And maybe again, a pre-Intanify world, because I know we've got some other ways of doing it now as well. But I think you said conversation earlier, but maybe you had a really good question of for identifying a trade secret. What are the 2 things that if they walked out the door would be a problem? Do you have go-to questions, or approaches, or frameworks for doing that mapping of identifying what maps to what?
That's a great question. I think, part of it is intuitive, because you already know what drives value. So I think it really depends on the awareness on the other side, with whom we do the mapping. So we before Intanify, we used to have a questionnaire, and the questionnaire spoke about, what have you developed, what problems that it solves, right? What else have you developed? What's your experience in the field? Who are the competitors? To kind of, by the end of that form, they would come along much more ready to the conversation. Now that we use Intanify, then we have the conversation starts a lot earlier. Because they kind of see the assets in front of their eyes, and it saves so much time. So we can give the value much quicker, of course, in a cost-effective way. But it's really, the secret sauce is kind of looking at the picture and understanding what an investor wants to see. And, sometimes with companies, we see that the way they see their competitive advantage is very different than what the IP practitioner sees the competitive advantage. And it's like, it can be a slippery slope. So you start with a questionnaire, you get the whole picture, then you start to understand the context and tread carefully with, understanding how you would present it, but also how they would feel comfortable in you presenting it.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that. So the company would see it differently to the IP professional, but the same thing. Like, what are some of those differences? Or what did you have in mind?
Sometimes the differences stem from a company seeing 5 years ahead, and seeing competitive advantage as potential competitive advantage. And if we talk about valuation, there would always be a gap between what you have now and where you can be in 5 years. But you kind of have to build, complete the gap. You kind of have to explain how this gap is going to be filled. And that's also subjective. So at the end of the day, your IP and your potential is only going to be as good as you as a founder can actually present it. And that's sometimes that's a challenge. And we just give the tools. What's industry practice? What are other deals that have been made in the industry? What companies were bought? In what valuation? What M&As exist in the industry? And all that we use to provide context to the results of the mapping. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Cool. All right. So yeah, talking about investors and M&A, like how do investors or acquirers look at the mapping in your experience?
I think that once you present it from the get-go,
Yeah.
In your pitch, then it's part of the deal. But if you just do the mapping after, in the due diligence, you kind of miss the boat because you kind of need it in your value proposition. So I think that if founders are able to talk the right language and signal, make the right signals to investors, then trade secrets will definitely become part of the conversation.
Yeah. So actually, how they look at it depends on how the investor presents it in a way that if you go out on the front foot and it's almost like slide 3, say, here's our value proposition and here are the 10 unique things that we own and control that underpin and create that. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is you just do your regular stuff, and then somewhere in the VDR there's a spreadsheet somewhere which doesn't get the same impact.
Now that you ask it, there's always a conversation about IP. Sometimes it's a conversation that happens very early on, and the founder just sends them a list of what they've filed, and sometimes it's with an attorney. So there's always a chance in this conversation to say, these are our assets, but you really want to be in the conversation where you have the negotiation on the value, right? Because you don't want the conversation to be, okay, so what are we getting as an investor? We want to you want to talk about future value, and we want to change the conversation about risk and talk about the potential value. And that's why it's really important to talk about these assets as early on in the process as possible.
Yeah, because it kind of frames the valuation discussion in the first place. Sets expectations. Cool. So I guess it's a bit tricky with many of these things. Patents and so on, easy enough. Here's the list. Trade secrets, there's a bit of a balance, right? Of what to disclose, at what point to disclose, how to disclose. Like, what would be your advice in that context?
I'll tell you a story. We once sat with a potential purchaser, and they had a whole team, a company with hundreds of patents that were very much interested in the trade secret value of the company. They saw that the company had 5 to 6 patents, but their legal team said, we see you're a team of 15 developers, we see your patents, but what we really want to know is, have you ever done any mapping of trade secrets? Have you know what your process is like? So it was clear they're very much informed about the potential value of a company that does a 12-hour day development, probably produces a lot of trade secrets. And they were happy to just get a high-level description of the trade secrets. And I think that's the standard. You want to have a high-level description of what your assets are, because it really shows that you've done the legwork. You know what your assets are. You know what contributes to your value, and you disclose that, and you just have to be aware that there's nothing there that's harmful to you. Usually there isn't. So I guess the short answer would be just a high-level description of your trade secrets will go a long way.
Yeah, and then you've not given anything up, right? So if it's in Intanify, it's like a 5-ish word title and then a 20-ish word kind of description where you've said, trade secret in X, and a little bit more on X, but not how you do it. not
Yeah,
the not
exactly.
the anything. Just like we've got a secret to do this, and then the buyer needs to believe you can do that or not. And if they don't believe it, then probably a short conversation anyway, and probably shouldn't have got to that point. Or there's ways of doing that in like confirmatory due diligence, where offers are made, things are binding, and then you share that to a third party or something like that. But in the first case, just the signal of having, here is our trade secret register with 100 important things that we do track, we do protect, we do restrict access to, and so on. Yeah,
absolutely. Listen, I've never been in an M&A, in a due diligence process where the attorney from the other side wanted to dig so deep to know how, what the trade secret was actually, maybe high level conversation about the technical, but never listen. We really need to see what your trade secrets are because we're not doing the deal without it, right?
Yeah. But it was important that you're able to do something. Cool. Yeah, Ilanit, if there was, I know you've given a couple of examples along the way for various things. I was wondering if there was any kind of interesting, war story or kind of experience that you had that you wanted to kind of leave us as we close.
Well, there's so many stories about trade secrets leaking. It's crazy. I'll give you two examples. One was a call at midnight from a client saying, listen, I'm really sorry to call these hours, but as this minute I see someone in my company sending to his Gmail account a huge amount of data and files, and I don't know what to do. And what should we do about it, right? So this is a scenario that happens when someone is thinking about, leaving work, and they may be just thinking of how do I summarize what I did for my ex-employer? It could be, and that was the case, but it was a big drama because we had this conversation in the morning. We had a conversation with a commercial attorney, sent out a letter, brought to a conversation, and ended up him committing and understanding that this was potentially dangerous for the company. And then there was another case of someone in the company that started uploading to LinkedIn a lot of sensitive information that shouldn't have been there. And she was just trying to help out in marketing and showing, how this company, but, they never ever made any training. So, how can you expect someone to kind of understand the sensitivity when you don't do basic awareness training?
Yeah.
And maybe the last example, is of investor that came to see a company and ended up being someone who represented a competitor, and it was just given a lot of information, and
And so they were acting as if they were investor, but they never were an investor, or they were
acting as if they were investors. They asked really good questions. They got, as you can imagine, really good answers. And that's what the trade secret protection plans does. It allows you to talk about the important things without spilling the beans. And it's so important. And I promise you that there are a lot of sales calls happening every day where the sales representatives they do a great job at selling, but they spill a lot of information in the process. And if the salesperson had a very high level list of what he should say, and more importantly, what he shouldn't say, it would make the conversation much smarter.
Cool. Well, look, anything else that you had in mind before we close up? But I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, it's fun. Always fun to talk about trade secrets, right?
Yeah, cool. James Bond or not. Cool. All right. Well, thanks very much. We will speak again soon.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks.